made by the people. And so here we are across the river over on the east side, if you would, of Jordan, and it's time for them to go across. But our lesson is today, it says God commissions. And there's some things that are addressed in today's lesson that we need to be aware of and that we have to deal with in life. There are realities of life, and one of them is our own mortality, isn't it? And as we're dealing with the death of Moses, it's coming up very soon. You know, we've already dealt with the death of his siblings. Miriam and Aaron have already died, and now Moses is about to leave, because as they come across the river, you know, the next thing, almost the next thing, is to go across. But there's some unfinished business, isn't there? There's some things that has to be done. And what is that? Pardon? Moses can't go, can he? No. God told him, he said, you will not go into the promised land. And so some changes have to take place. What's the first job you ever had? And who trains you in that job? How did you learn that job? You know, was it, you know, back years ago, and it's becoming more popular in our culture today, they may call it different things, but like apprenticeships. And an apprenticeship there, you work beside someone else, a journeyman or whatever, that knows that trade or knows that skill, has that knowledge, and you learn that trade. And so do not all of us have to learn? Sure. We're not born with that knowledge. You know, we have to study, we have to learn, we have to read about it, and so on. So as we look in today's lesson, you know, as leaders are chosen, it's important that the right leader is chosen. It's important that a leader is chosen that is capable of doing the job. But it's also important to us as we travel down life's highway, when it comes near the end, is there things that we need to look to in the future concerning our lives? Is there things that we are doing that somebody else is going to have to pick up the slack in? Sure. And, you know, ideally, you know, and I tell at work down there, I said, there is no one person here that should be indispensable. I said, everybody, there needs to be cross-training. People need to know the jobs here. Why? You never know. You go out on the highway today whether you're going to come back or not. You know, wrecks and so on there. You never know when something sudden happens, you know. And I said, if a organization is run correctly, then that one person should be able to walk away and not miss a beat. That not, you know, lose speed, or not say that they won't be missed, but that they won't be missed as far as the job getting done. Sure, they will be missed. You know, their presence will be missed. You know, the people that love them will miss them and so on. But people should be trained to do that. And so we call, one of the words there in today's lesson is called a mentor. And what is a mentor? He's a wise person, isn't he? Experienced person there that makes a good counselor. I think I was reading here that the University of Phoenix did a study recently on mentors and their roles and so on. And they said the top 10 categories as mentors in our culture. What would you say, what were some of the names you would name as some of the top mentors in our culture today? Some of them has always been. What about mom and dad? The parents. You know, that begins at home, doesn't it? You know, the parents have from the time of birth there, as they have that baby and they begin to train that. And I think about in our culture today with especially teenagers, seem like they don't know how to do anything. And we hire sometimes down at work some summer help and students and over the summer if they're old enough, to work there. And it's surprisingly how little they know. And you say, you don't know how to do that, or you don't know how to do this, and why would that be? They're not taught, are they? And why do we not teach them? I think we all realize the importance of mentorship, of being a mentor there, but we're failing it, don't we? We don't practice it, And one of the biggest reasons is say, well, I don't have time. If you teach somebody something, it takes some time, doesn't it? You have to invest some things there. You have to invest some time. You have to invest some patience, and you have to, you have to be alongside that person there and be able to show them and then correct them in a loving way, in a way there that's not judgmental, but that they can learn. And a lot of us say, well, if I want it done right, I'll just do it myself. Well, nobody will never learn if that's the attitude we have. Yeah. It's just I don't have the time to do it. I don't have the patience to do it. And I want it done right. And Janice? Our time is consumed, isn't it? And not always with the right things. And our sports will consume you. Jake's played football. He just finished senior year. 7 days a week. They had practice or they had to be at school 7 days a week. After school, they had to stay late every evening. On Sunday afternoon, we have our family dinner usually, and he would have to hurry up and eat, and he had to go to school. They'd watch films, training films and so on. That's too much. But we've got to be willing to invest in individuals to train them. Well, we see in today's lesson there is who in biblical mentors, who comes to mind? What about Eli? Remember Samuel? His mom brought Samuel there, and Eli, he mentored Samuel all those years, isn't he? We can come on down through the way, and there's just so many in the Bible. Of course, needless to say, that some even say that Daniel mentored Nebuchadnezzar in some ways, But as we look, Saul, did he not mentor David? David, Solomon. We come in the New Testament, and we see, the best example we have is Jesus mentored his disciples, didn't he? He was preparing them. He knew he was looking to the future. He knew he wasn't going to be here very long. He had 3 years to walk with them and to teach them, and to instruct them, because they were going to carry the work on after he left. And so he spent the time with them. What about Paul? Paul with Timothy, yeah. Wow. What about Barnabas? You remember Paul and Barnabas separated? Well, Barnabas, who did he take? He took John Mark back with him, didn't he? And Paul was glad he did, because later on he called for John Mark, didn't he, to come and be with him. And we could go on. There's a lot of examples that people that took the time to train. And of course, in today's lesson, is Moses and Joshua. And so we know that Joshua, had been a part of that work from the very beginning. As soon as they came out of the land, as soon as they came over, as soon as Moses went up on Mount Sinai, what happened? Who went with Moses? Joshua. He told the elders, you stay down here lower, and he took Joshua on up further with him. We know that when he got to the promised land over there and they looked over, then he was called out to be one of the spies, wasn't he? And so on. So he had been with it 40 years that they had been together, leading, in the wilderness. So mentoring is important. I think we're challenged in today's lesson to look, what is my legacy? What am I leaving behind? What in my life do I need to have somebody trained to take it over, to carry it forward, to make sure, important things there in our life, and most importantly, be spiritual things. What am I involved in that somebody else needs to be able to do? Carry on the work, and so on. As we do that, we need to not only look at the present, we need to look at the future, what this is and who God has put in beside us, to do that with. Well, as we look in our background, there's chapter 27, what is it, verses 12 through 23 is our focal passage. In the first part of chapter 27 there, some laws of inheritance and so on is given. We see that in that culture, inheritance was passed on to the sons, was it not? The eldest son received how much of the inheritance? 2/3. And so here we have, I think that's down in verse 7, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right and say, surely give them a possession. Here these daughters, their family had been taken. Their dad was no longer alive. They had no brothers. And it was time to go in. And as the census was taken, there were two reasons for the census. Number one was they were going in to conquer the land. And so militarily, God wanted to know who was going to battle. When their leader called for soldiers to come out as they were going to fight, they had to know who was going to send and how many they had and how there would be the strategy to be played. Another thing there, that they needed to, it was going to be a job to conquer Canaan, wasn't it? And so as we look here, the other thing there was the division of the land. And the size of the tribe was proportionate to the amount of land they got. And so these daughters, they said, we won't get any land. We won't have any possession. And so what did happen? They asked both. He went and he asked God. God said, that is right. They should have a portion and give them that portion. And we come on down in there, and the law was set up to be perpetual after that. There in verse 10 says, verse 11, and if the father have no brethren, then ye shall give the inheritance unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it, and it shall be unto the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. And then we begin our focal passage today as Moses is facing death. And we see in verses 12 through 14, says, and the Lord said to Moses, get thee up into the Mount Abarim, and see the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, and when thou hast seen it, thou also shalt be gathered into thy people, as Aaron thy brother was gathered, for ye rebelled against my commandment in the desert of Zin, in the strife of the congregation, to sanctify me at the water before their eyes, that is the water of Meribah in Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. And so that unfinished business was Moses could not go with them. And so, but God had promised him, he could look over into the land. And we say, well, this is a little bit odd here. God says, all right, you're going to come up, you go up to the mountain. And he tells him, he reminds him why. And, now, do you think God is tantalizing him for what he had done? No. There's consequences of our actions. There's consequences of sin. Just as all the other that rebelled and wouldn't go over into the land of Canaan, and God told them all those 20 years and older would not go into the land because of Moses' sin, not the same sin, but because of that, God had told him. And, he didn't give God the honor, did he? Because of his, what was his pride, I think, and he was upset or whatever. He just took things into his own hand, and he didn't obey God. God told him, speak to the rock, and he smote the rock. And so there's consequences. God said, you won't go in. And here it does not say that God, that he went to God and asked him, to reconsider. But we go on over in Deuteronomy, the 3rd chapter, I think verse 25, and it will tell us, verse 25 says, I pray thee, let me go over and see the good land that beyond Jordan, the goodly mountain and Lebanon. But the Lord was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And the Lord said unto me, let it suffice thee, speak no more unto me of this matter. And so, and that was it. One time Moses asked him about it. Deuteronomy bears that out. Now in this passage in Numbers he does not. But he says, my death, the Lord says, it's time to go up. It's time to look over. I keep my promises there. You're going to look over to the land. You will not go over into that land. Well, you think about some of the emotions of Moses as he went up on that mountain, and he looked over into the land. That mountain there, I'm told, was probably 2,600 plus elevation above sea level. And he was looking across the lower part of the Dead Sea. As he looked to the west side, when they were over on the east side of Jordan, as they looked, he could get a good view of that land, couldn't he? And as he looked over into that land, I think there were some things there that God was telling him. Now, you're not going to get to go into that land, but I've got a land better than that you're going to. You're going to, he tells him here in these verses, he says, get thee up to the mount, see the land which I have given to the children of Israel, and when thou hast seen it, thou shalt also be gathered to thy people. He said, you're not going there, but you're going to be with your people. You're going to heaven. You're going to be a better land than this, And so heaven, a lot of people say heaven is a promised land. Well, not really, is it? Heaven is our reward there. Heaven is where we are. That was the promised land, but Moses was getting to go on up and be with his people. As we said, Miriam and Aaron had already gone, and others. And so, that had to be exciting to him. I don't think Moses in any way feared death, do you? I think his relationship with God is so unique. The only prophet of God, the only man of God that ever communicated to God face to face. Wow, no other person ever did that. That's just amazing. And what a relationship that was, that God allowed him to do that God blessed him to do that. And it says, and when thou hast seen it, as you're gathered to the people, as Aaron thy brother was gathered, for he rebelled against my commandment in the desert of sin, in the strife of the congregation, to sanctify me at the water before the eyes, that is the water of Meribah and Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. And so God does not discriminate against levels of people, does he? In other words, those in charge stand under the law of God, stand under the commandments of God, just like the lowest person. Or the slave, if you would, and the king, we all obey the same law. God holds us all accountable. And so God is holding Moses accountable. This right here was severe enough that he was not going to allow him to go over into that land. And so he is facing death. And as he faces death here, there's some things that comes to mind there, our own mortality. And what do we do with that? As he mentions in Psalms, the writer of Psalms there in Psalms 139 says, God knows our past. Our days are numbered, aren't they? He knows our comings and goings. He knows all about us, and he knows what we're going to do. He knew Jeremiah told him, I knew you before you were born, didn't you? When you were in your mother's womb. And so when we think about our own mortality there's some things we need to keep in mind. We need to live a balanced life. I said, what do you mean by a balanced life? Well, how many of us and in our world today are caught up in living in the here and now? All we think about is what I need to do, what in this lifetime here. Most of our preparations are made, from the time we get old enough, we're in school there, we begin preparing for a career, we begin to preparing for a family, we begin putting away money for a retirement or 401k. We're consumed with preparing for the present. But how much thought, how much preparation are we given to the future? And that's the only thing eternal. These other things will just come and go. They'll be burned up. And so we need to live a balanced life. And in that balanced life, how many of you think you're mentors? Do any of you realize that you are mentoring someone else? And we don't know who. People are watching you, watching your daily walk, watching what you do, what you say, and everything, how you conduct yourself as a Christian. Talking spiritual things now. And as they watch you, you become an example to them. And so as you become an example to them there, a lot of the times they know that. We know that our family watches us, don't we? We know that our neighbors watch us. And when they do, then we need to be aware of that. And if you would, we need to invest in that. We need to make a special effort to lead them, to teach them, the ways of God. Teach them, how they should live. So as we look on over in this next section, here it says, looking to the future. Facing death, looking to the future. And Moses spake unto the Lord, saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, which may go out before them, and which may go in before them, and which may lead them out, and which may bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord be not as sheep which have no shepherd. Moses had been their leader for 40 years. Now, as a good leader, he was looking, what is going to happen to my people? Remember the type of leader Moses was? As he would intercede, that God was going to wipe every one of them out? And, more than once, wasn't it? And he told Moses, he said, I will make a nation out of you, out of your loins, and so on. And Moses, as a good leader, he fell before God. He prayed to God, save my people. I will be their leader. Save them, give them, pardon them, give them another chance. And so now this people there that he had loved, even though a lot of times he wanted to probably take their lives himself, but he loved them. He wanted to make sure they were taken good care of. He was a leader there that knew they had needs. They needed somebody over them who would govern them in the right way. And remember, government in that day and time was not a secular government, was it? It was a spiritual government. As the laws of the land were given by God. And as God gave the laws to Moses, and as they passed them down to the people, and he was to make sure they were carried out, he had helpers, and he had people that he was mentoring there with that. But, they had to, they needed somebody that would govern them, would be a good governor over them, and they also need a good military leader to lead them into Canaan and to take that land. And so he asked God here, he said, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh. Now, one other time that he had prayed that, and does anybody remember when that was? We had covered that here a couple of weeks ago, back when Korah, all those were about to be destroyed because of Korah's sin. He prayed the same thing. In other words, God, you are the God of all flesh, all living flesh. You know, you are the supreme God, the God of all the spirits. Set a man over the congregation. He says they need a man that, and it alludes right there to the military part of it, doesn't he? But not only the military, the first 40 years of his life he spent in Egypt. The next 40 years he spent on the backside of the desert as what? A shepherd. Isn't that the life of a shepherd? He leads his sheep. He goes out before them. He takes them to pasture. He makes sure they're fed. He makes sure they have water to drink. He makes sure that the wild beasts don't come in and do harm to them. He protects them. He feeds them. He said, this people need a leader like that. They need a shepherd leader. By the way, that shepherd is the same word that we use for our pastor today, isn't it? A shepherd leader, a pastor there is one that feeds the congregation, one that protects the congregation, one that looks out for the congregation. And he said, we need a man that will go out before them. But not only that, that may bring them into the congregation of the Lord, be as the sheep have no shepherd. I don't want them to be like the lost sheep. I want them to have a shepherd that will go out and hunt that one. But not only that, I want him to be a man there as his army goes out. As he gets word from God there to do battle, when he calls the troops up, he will lead those troops. And when he goes out before them, then he will come in with them. He will be there in their forefront. He will be leading them. He will be making wise decisions. This is the kind of leader that I'm praying for, God. Will you do that? As he asks God there for that. And then in verse 18, God provides. And the Lord said unto Moses, take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thy hand upon him. And God says, I've got a man. Now, do you think that was any surprise to Moses? But Moses did not presume to make the decision for God, did he? Moses said, God, this is your choice. This is your man. You know, and when he said Joshua is the man, I think Moses was pleased with that, because I think Moses said, "Amen." You know, if this is the leader there. This is the one that's been there. You know, he wanted to go in the first time into the land of Canaan. I know he will lead the people in there again. Why did he want to go in? Because he said, we serve a God that will give us victory. We serve an all-powerful God. You know, as he takes us in, he'll protect us and he will give us victory. And what better man is there to lead the people in? He said, this man Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom the Spirit, you know, I think not necessarily just the Holy Spirit, he was a man of strong spirit, a spirit of vigor, a spirit of work. You know, he would do things. He didn't find Joshua sitting around with idle hands, did you? He was busy in God's work. Said, in whom the Spirit, and lay thy hands upon him. And here we see the commissioning, as the lesson is entitled today. God commissions. And he says, and lay thy hands upon him, and set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and give him a charge in their sight. And thou shalt put some of thy honor upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall ask counsel of him after the judgment of Urim before the Lord. At his word shall they go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the children of Israel with him, even all the congregation. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him, and he took Joshua and set him before Eleazar the priest and for all the congregation, and he laid his hands upon him, and he gave him a charge as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. He says, Moses, Joshua's the man, and he needs to be commissioned. I want you to commission him You remember what the church did at Antioch when they said, the Lord spoke to them about sending out Paul and Barnabas as missionaries, and they laid hands on them and they sent them out. They were anointed kings and so on, have been said to be anointed of God. They're chosen of God for this. So he says, I want him to bring before, I want you to put what did he say here? Give him a charge, and thou shalt put some of thine honor. He said, you're not going to put all your honor. In other words, you're going to give him honor. You're going to give him authority, as a leader of that. But he will not rule like you rule. You rule as God spoke to you directly. God will speak to him through the priest, through the high priest, Eleazar, which was a son of who? Aaron. He was the younger son, wasn't he? Remember what happened to his two older brothers? They offered up strange fire, and God took their life. And so now, here he is he is the high priest. And he is the one there. Joshua is to be the military leader. He's to be the leader, but this Eleazar will be the spiritual leader. And he will be the go-between. He will be the mouthpiece. God will speak to him and as he gives orders. And as God speaks to him, as he gives orders, as they come in and they go out. And so by doing this, by laying this, by commissioning him, what was God doing? He was showing the people that Joshua was God's choice to lead them into this land. He was showing them that nobody else needs to rise up. Nobody else needs to try to usurp authority in any way. He is my choice, and he will lead the people. And I'm commissioning him, that this ceremony is in God's authority. Wow. We got one more lesson, I think, in Numbers before we go to Deuteronomy. Next week, it goes all the way from